Welcome to the Breakaway podcast. Thanks for joining us as we study the book of Philippians. For more information on Breakaway, visit breakawayministries.org. We hope you enjoy the talk and stick around for more at the end.
Tonight's scripture is Philippians 1:12 through 26. I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of the selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment.
What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed. And in that I rejoice. Yes, and I will rejoice. For I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Christ Jesus, this will turn out for my deliverance. As it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be at all ashamed, but that with full courage now, as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me. Yet which shall I choose, I cannot tell. I am hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you all, for your progress and joy in the faith, so that in me you may have ample cause to glory in Christ Jesus, because of my coming to you again.
Well, it was fascinating to be online last Tuesday and watch the tech geek world collectively lose their minds when Apple announced the iPhone 6 and the Apple Watch, right? Unreal. People freaking out online, right, about these new products coming out. And I didn't watch the whole program of the new iPhone or things like that, but I've watched a couple of them to know that I would guess what happened as they announced the new iPhone. This is not the new iPhone, but as they announced the new iPhone, they probably didn't at any point say, another feature we're really excited about is its ability to hold open doors. Notice how it slides easily under the door to create a stop opening it. We are revolutionizing room entry tonight, ladies and gentlemen, right? I'm guessing you didn't hear that. I don't think anywhere in the production they said, and look how easily it spreads butter on toast. Have you noticed just how evenly the distribution is? They didn't do it. Why did they not do that? Well, I would guess because what they understand and what we understand is that the greatest potential is reached and the highest satisfaction is enjoyed when the thing is used for its created intent. That its greatest potential, the phone, is going to be reached, and the highest satisfaction for the user is going to be experienced if we use it according to its created intent, which is to be a phone and a personal computing device that slowly takes over our lives, right? And the reality is we see that and we understand that. If I'm really going to get everything I need out of a phone, I can use it as a doorstop. I can use it to spread butter on toast, but that's a waste of its potential. If I really want to maximize its potential in my life, if I want the highest satisfaction, let me use it according to its created intent. And let me tell you something, that's true of all things. Not just Apple products. Freedom for anything living or non-living, freedom is not the absence of limitation. It's the ability to pursue unhindered our created intent. That true freedom is not the absence of limitation. It's not. But it's the liberty to fulfill created intent. A fish is most free when it swims, right? Because that's what a fish is made to do. A bird is most free when it flies, because that's what a bird is made to do, right? And so freedom is not the absence of all limitations, but it's the ability to fulfill created intent. What was I made to do? Let me do that, right? Now, I say that, and as soon as I say that, some of you go, that makes sense, but let me just say this. Not everybody believes that. Not everybody buys that we were created and that Creator has an intent, and that as we fulfill that, we reach our highest potential and our deepest satisfaction. Not everybody believes that. So it's interesting, Life magazine, which I don't even think exists anymore, but around when you were born, Life magazine had an issue come out about the meaning of life. And they just interviewed a bunch of random people about why are we here? What are we doing here? I had a boss that used to say, everyone can tell you what they do. Very few can tell you why they do what they do. And so this was asking the big why. Why do you do anything? Why do you get up in the morning? What's your reason for existence? When it's all over, what will you have done that meant anything? What's the meaning of your life? What's the reason for all that you do? That was the question they put out there. And they asked everybody, scientists, celebrities, and you got a whole different mix of answers. You had chipper answers like Jose Martinez, who said, we are here to die, just live and die. I do some fishing, pay taxes, and then I'll drop dead. We're going to destroy ourselves, nothing we can do about it. So that little chipper chestnut is in there. But basically, as you read through them, and I won't read them all, they break into two basic categories. The first category were people like Garrison Keillor, who said things like, to know and serve God is why we're here. That there's a Creator, and He has an intent for us, and we're meant to fulfill it. They asked Mike Ditka, and Mike Ditka, the coach, said this, I believe we're here for a reason. We're created by somebody, to live for somebody, to return to somebody. I believe I'm created by God to do the job He's given me while I'm here, to serve Him, and then I'll return to Him. That was from Coach Mike Ditka, right? And the idea behind that, and there was a lot of people that said something like this. Basically, the idea is there's a Creator, and what we're meant to do is we are meant to discover and embrace His reasons for why we're alive. That's why we're here. To discover and embrace why He made us, to see what He made us for, and to embrace that. That's our highest good, right? And yet there was this other whole category that came from a bit of a different direction. I'll read probably the most articulate of them was a paleontologist named Stephen Jay Gould, and I won't read his whole thing, but he said this about humanity. He says, our appearance on the scene of existence looks more like an accidental afterthought than the culmination of a prefigured plan. He says, we're here because one odd group of fishes had a peculiar fin anatomy that could transform into legs for terrestrial creatures. We're here because the earth never froze entirely during an ice age. Because a small, tenuous species arriving in Africa 250,000 years ago has managed so far to survive by hook and by crook. We may yearn for a higher answer, but none exists. And then he says this, we must construct these answers ourselves from our own wisdom and ethical sense. There is no other way. So there's two basic paths being presented by Life magazine. And incidentally, they're still the two most prominent paths alive today. The first one is, I exist to discover and embrace God's plan for me, that God made me for a reason. I have a destiny, and I'm meant to fulfill it, that I discover and embrace why He made me, namely to know Him and to make Him known. Right? And there's this other thing that says, no, we're not trying to discover or embrace some higher purpose, because there is no higher purpose. You have no destiny. You're an accident. You're a random collocation of atoms, right? And so you don't discover and embrace a destiny, you create one. You just figure out what makes you happy and do that till you disappear, right? So on one side, it's embrace created intent. The other is there's no creator, so you create what you're here to do, right? And those are still the two main ideas that I hear in America all the time. I'm pursuing what God made me to do, or I'm just pursuing whatever makes me happy, right? Those are the two ideas. Now, for the rest of our time, I could sit here and give you some philosophical backgrounds about each camps and discuss the veracity of them and those kind of higher thinking forms. That would be a totally worthwhile thing to do that we won't do here. What I want to do is take them both to the street. And I just want to take both of those ways of living life, ways of pursuing life, and say, let's just put them down under the gritty, mean streets of College Station, Texas, and see how they work out in real life. So this isn't the proof of which one's true or not. I'm just looking at pragmatically, how do these two things work out on the surface of real life? How do they play out when your circumstances change? How do they play out when someone else succeeds at something you want to do, right? How does it affect different aspects of your life, right? Like your desires. Pursuing one of those two roads. What does it do to your desires? How does it relate to morality and doing good to other people? How do those two roads handle the inevitability of death? So that's what I want to look at, those things. At the street level, how do these two paths react to the basic things you're going to encounter in life, right? And hopefully you'll see a path that makes sense for you. Do I pursue God and how he made me, or do I just make up whatever I want to do until I'm gone? And we're going to do it by looking at the life of Paul in this fascinating text, this unbelievable passage where he unpacks his life, that in the midst of some very difficult circumstances, he has incredible joy. And as we look at it, the first thing I want to look at is as we look at these two paths, how do these two paths handle the changing of circumstances? Pursuing God's design for my life or making up my own meaning in life? Embracing God's plan or creating my own? How do they respond to a change in your circumstances? Well, the first point is this. If I embrace a God-given reason for my life, a God-given reason cannot be derailed by the changing of my circumstances. They can't. If I embrace a God-given reason for my life, it can't be derailed by the change of my circumstances. If you create your own purpose in life, it can be ruined by the subtle changing of circumstance. It can. So if you decide to enter life and you go, you know what, there might be a God out there somewhere, but I don't know his plan for my life, and I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to make my own life. Or if you say, I don't know if there's a God or not, I'm just going to go for it. I'm doing my life. If you decide, I'm going to come up with my life, I'm going to create a finite reason why I exist and make it the ultimate thing in my life, and I'm going to pursue that. You just need to know, if that's what you've decided to do with your life, you are subject to every wind of fate. Right? Because if you make your desire success in a sport, what happens when you get injured? Right? Your meaning for life ceases to exist. Right? That's what happened to me in high school. Right? If you make success in a sport, your meaning in life, what happens when you get old? Many of us have been around to see some of our great sports figures. Man, they're pursuing sports success, and as they get older into their 30s, they just can't move as fast and everything hurts. And you watch some of them just get lost. They don't even know what to do anymore. So some of them turn to drugs or turn to alcohol just to numb the pain, or some of them just hang out there way too long. You watch them in mixed martial arts and you're like, get that 40-year-old out of there. Someone's going to kill him, right? But he doesn't know what else to do. That was all he had. And to take it from him, he loses himself, right? If you pick a finite thing, a change in circumstances can ruin your reason for living. If you make it success at business, making money, what happens if the stock market takes a downturn? And let me tell you something, we've seen that in Texas. We've seen some financial downturns while I've been here at Breakaway, while you've been alive, that there were people out there that said, my goal in life is to make a bunch of money. And when the financial markets collapsed a few years ago, when Enron tanked in Texas, there were people putting guns in their mouths and pulling the trigger. That's reality. Because they realized that was my reason for living and I lost it, so I don't know why to keep on living. Do you see that? If you make it a finite thing, any change of circumstance, and you can lose it. You can lose it, right? You just got to know you're subject to the winds of fate, right? And that's a scary thing. But if you have a God-given purpose, that I'm pursuing his purposes in my life, no circumstance can ever shake your reason for living. That's what you see with Paul. You see Paul in verse 12 and 13, he says, I want you to know, brothers, what's happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. His reason for living was to advance the gospel, the good news of Jesus. And he says, I want you to know that my circumstances have served to advance it. What are his circumstances? He's in jail. Now, if you look at Paul's life, Paul's existence was traveling all over the world to proclaim the message of Jesus. And so you would think if his whole reason for existing was to travel around and tell people about Jesus, being locked down would probably ruin that. But for him, he said, I have an eternal purpose to make Jesus known. The changing of circumstances can't shake that. So when he lands in prison, he goes, guys, I landed in prison. And he doesn't say, well, I used to travel around and now I'm in jail and I'm a victim and I'm lost. He doesn't say that. He says, I'm in jail, And I guess this is my new mission field. How you doing? And he says, the entire Imperial Guard knows I'm here for Christ. He lands in jail and goes, I guess this is my new mission field. What's your name, buddy? Jesus. All right. And starts unpacking it. Because the circumstance doesn't matter. The job never changes, right? And you go, how is that even true for you? Well, it's this reason, because Paul knows what he told them earlier. He called God he who began a good work in you. And he said he'll be faithful to complete it. He says, my purposes never fail because my God runs everything. He started a good work in me and he'll finish it. He told the Romans that we know that God works all things for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose. God's purposes will be fulfilled. So if I link my purpose into his, I can't lose no matter what happens. I win because the guy who's directing my life directs everything. And that's some serious job security, right? And so I remember for us at Breakaway, one of the worst things that ever happened at Breakaway was not long after I got here as director, the rent for Reed Arena got tripled our rent. We didn't have a lot of money, right? And I remember looking at that, and I remember saying in that meeting, you just killed us. And I walked out of that meeting numb. I was like, I just moved to College Station, and this is going to be a very short trip because we can't exist anymore. I didn't know what to do. And I felt so lost. Oh my gosh, this is over. And yet something interesting happened because of that price increase. People that are involved at A&M, that are diehard Aggies, suddenly heard about us. They didn't know we existed. They were like, what is this thing? It's a Bible study? Where? They pay rent? And they were just kind of asking questions. And so suddenly I started meeting all these diehard Aggie dudes that love Jesus. And as I started meeting these guys, suddenly I started arriving in places where I'm in box seats on the 50-yard line at games going, what am I doing here? Talking with these different people. I'm meeting different people in the halls of power at A&M, talking with different people, sitting with the president, doing different stuff that I had no idea I'd be doing. And suddenly I'm mixing around. I'm going out into different cities and meeting all these people, from CEOs to moms that love God and love A&M, and they're hearing about Breakaway and wanting me to come tell them about them. And suddenly there's this big groundswell of people that raise the finances for us to keep going. I wasn't even hitting them up for money. They were coming to me. And then 5 years later, the rent went back down. And we weren't a victim in any of that. It was kind of some bigger forces at play with the university. No one was coming after us. It was just some financial issues there. But the rent went back down a few years ago. And yet here was the thing. Not in spite of that price increase, but because of it. We went to venues we would have never gone to before. Kyle Field had the biggest breakaway in history. And then Simpson Drill Field last year had an even bigger breakaway than that. And so because of that tripling of rent, we got to reach more people with the gospel than we've ever reached before. And we got a stronger budget than ever before. And we got back in here and are able to do more because of that. And so the worst thing that ever happened to Breakaway was the tripling of our rent. And unarguably, the best thing that ever happened to Breakaway was the tripling of our rent. And I look at that and go, and that's my God, because he runs this. He runs this. When I was a sophomore at A&M, I didn't have a lot of friends for the first few months. I didn't know I was about to make a ton. I just knew I was friendless. And so I sat in the MSC alone, and a guy came and sat to talk to me because I probably looked sad and like a stoner because I had long hair. And so he came to just sort of help me, right? And sat to visit with me. I didn't know who he was. I found out later he was the director of a thing called Breakaway. And so I look now, and neither of us had any clue I would be running Breakaway right now. But the reason I'm here is because I was lonely as a sophomore, right? Because my God works all things for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. The city of Dothan is mentioned 2 times in the Bible, twice. One of them is when Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers. That's brutal, right? Human trafficked by his brothers, sold into Egypt. And God does nothing, lets him get sold. It's mentioned later, Dothan, as a city, much later in the Bible. And it's a city that's under attack. And the man of God, Elijah, is in the midst of the city, and they beg Elijah, will you move? Will you pray and beg God to save the city? Elijah prays for God to save the city. God moves miraculously and powerfully and saves the whole city. And so if you look at that story, you go, well, is God involved in life or not? Because he stepped into Dothan to save Elijah, but he didn't step in to save Joseph. But if you follow the story of Joseph, what happened? He's sold into slavery into Egypt. So in Egypt, he can rise to power and save not only that nation during a famine, but his own nation and family as well, affecting generations. God was at work both actively in saving Dothan here, and God was just as much in work as doing nothing as Joseph was sold into slavery, because God works all things according to his counsel of his will. Amen? And so when I'm on board with his purposes, I can't lose. And so people came up to me all this week and like, man, are you just so bummed Simpson didn't work out? I'm like, I'm a little disappointed, but I'm not devastated. And I don't have to come up with some reason like, maybe I would have been struck by lightning if I hadn't been in Reed. I don't have to worry about it. Maybe there's some reason 30 years from now that we weren't supposed to be on Simpson. I don't know. I don't have to worry about that. It's above my pay grade. I just pursue him, and he shakes it down. And my purposes never fade, right? Because he runs this place. He runs all circumstances, and he harnesses even prison for his good. You got that? I got to hurry because I got several more points. Number 2, how do these two things relate to the success of other people? What about the success of other people? If I create my own purposes, then the success for other people will always be a threat to my joy. If I'm creating my own reason for living, if I've created something that if I accomplish that or get that or am that, that's what completes me, gives me meaning in life. If I make a finite thing the ultimate thing in my life, the success of other people in that field will always threaten to steal my joy, right? You've seen that. If you're the funny guy in your group of friends and some other guy moves in that's funnier, what happens? Everyone's like, ah ha ha, and you're like, ah ha ha. I hate that guy. He lacks character. And I don't like it, right? You're like, he has to be stopped. You don't want him around, right? Some of you, and let's be honest now, here it comes. Some of you are in selective organizations, and you either thought this, or God forbid you did this. As someone went out for that selective organization and was trying to get in, there was no deficiency in them. There was no lack of skill set to get them in, but you thought about or maybe actively tried to not get them in the group for no other reason than they kind of came off as you 2.0. That you're like, if they get in here, they will grow too strong. I must kill them now, right? And you're like, I think she's killed people, right? And you do anything to cut them down at the knees because you go, they'll be a threat to me. She's too cute, he's too funny, he's too smart. I got to shut it down. That if you find a thing that gives you meaning when someone else is good at it, it threatens you. It was interesting. I listened to 3 interviews, Mike Myers, David Letterman, and Eminem. And all 3 of them said the same thing. They heard somebody else in their field who was so good at what they were willing to do, they got depressed and fell into a funk. Because comedy, the ability to rap was their source of meaning. And when they saw someone else succeed, it robbed them of all of their joy. And some of you know what that tastes like. And yet, if your purposes are God's, if you say, but my purpose is his purpose, which is namely to know him and make him known, then guess what? When someone else succeeds, I celebrate because we're all in this together. That's what you see happen in Paul in 14 and 18. He says, me getting in jail, let the guards know about Jesus, and it caused the brothers to be more confident and preach the gospel. He says, when I got in jail, other Christians started firing out there and preaching the gospel. It's like when you see a dude go cliff diving, and you're there. Once one guy dives off the cliff, as a man, you're like morally obligated to jump off. You know, you're like, well, I got to go, and off you go. These guys saw Paul preach Christ and get arrested for it. They saw his boldness and his courage, and these other Christians said, hey, it's our turn. We got to go. And he said some of them did it out of beautiful motives because they love me and love Jesus. He said some of them did it out of selfish ambition, that they were preaching Jesus, but they saw with me out of the way, it was a chance for them to get famous. It was a chance to them to get popular. And they did it to sort of take a dig at me. Can ministers compete in an ugly way like that? You bet they can. Right? You can be in the religious world and still live out of a sad little perspective of seeking not God's glory but mine. And Paul looks at that and he goes, I'm not advocating that motive. But as I look at other people succeeding in preaching the gospel while I'm in chains, he said, I rejoice. I rejoice. He said, because I'm put here for the defense of the gospel. That word put here was a military word. I'm stationed here. He looks at it and says, this is a great military campaign of God, not to destroy people, but to rescue, to let people know Jesus. And he said, I'm stationed in this prison. So I have a purpose in this prison. That guy's stationed out there. Maybe that guy's reaching more people right now. Who cares? We're in the same goal, so everybody wins. We're both chasing something beautiful, Jesus, so we're home team. So if he succeeds, I win. And if I succeed, he wins, because we're all chasing the same thing. That's the beauty of Christianity. When I pursue God's goals, Paul looks and says, other people are succeeding, and I rejoice. I rejoice at it. Even if someone might think they're my competitor, I don't care. And so I look around, and at Breakaway last week, we had 85 ministers from 28 different churches and ministries gathered together, praying together. That's awesome. And that's the people of Jesus. We're not competitors. We're home team. So when your church grows, I celebrate, right? When your ministry grows, we rejoice together. I watched a video last week. Two of the largest churches in Dallas are The Village and Watermark. And Watermark put out a video last week called What I Really Think About the Village. And you read that title and you're like, oh, son. And you click on it, and it's the pastor of Watermark Church celebrating with deep conviction how beautiful it is to see the village grow in proclaiming the gospel of Jesus. And I watched that, and I'm just freaking out like, I freaking love these guys, and I love this deal because we're on the same team, man. Everybody wins here. We're home team. And when my purposes are God's, other people's success is a cause for celebration. It doesn't steal my joy. As these two purposes encounter the weight of your desires, if you create your own purposes, it can't hold the freight of your life. It can't hold the freight of your desires. If you say, I'm going to take a finite thing and make it the ultimate thing in my life, ultimately it can't handle that kind of weight. It won't ultimately be the satisfier of your soul if you take a finite thing and make it the ultimate thing in your life. It can't. Some of you, you're made it romantic love. That is your big goal. That's what you're after. But let me tell you something. There is no man, ladies, that can fulfill every passionate desire of your heart and be that stable comforter of all your insecurities. There's no guy that can do that. And guys, there's no woman that can satisfy every aspect of your heart and calm and comfort you in every difficulty in life. There's no human being that can do that. And I know as soon as I say that, some of you go, I don't believe you. He speaks lies tonight, right? And you don't believe me. Just try flipping it. Imagine, ladies, if some guy came up to you and said, hey, I just want to let you know I'm looking for you to satisfy every desire of my heart. I'm looking for you to be the complete satisfier of my every whim and to be the one who secures all my insecurities and brokenness and failings and comforts me in every category of my life until the end of all time. As they say that, you're like, I don't know that I can do that. You can't. And ladies, let me be clear. He can't do it either. No guy can do that. He doesn't even know how. He's still working out hygiene. He can't solve all the complexities of your heart. We can't do that. And yet so many people in America want what one author called apocalyptic romance. We're looking for romance to be the satisfier of our everything. That's why there's so much divorce. You know that? Because people go in and they want their marriage to be everything, and it can't handle the freight of all your desires. It can't. It breaks it. And if you take a finite thing and try to make it the ultimate thing in your life, you destroy both the thing and yourself. Did you know that? I watched a TED Talk the other day. Not a Christian organization, not a Christian guy. But he was talking about pornography and why he quit watching it. And there was no religious conviction in his life to do it. But he said, I was obsessed with sex. And so is much of our culture. And he said, and as I dove into pornography deeper and deeper, he said, I found as I watched these sex acts, they lacked gentleness, human touch. And they lacked humor, real human interaction. And he said, so what I discovered was my obsession with sex and our obsession with sex destroyed sex, and it was destroying me. He said, my trying to make sex the ultimate was ruining the very act of sex. It was robbing it of some of its most tender and precious aspects. He says, and it was making me into something I didn't want to be as a man. You take a finite thing and try to make it ultimate. It can't. It can't, right? And our history is replete with people who took finite things and tried to make them ultimate things. And when they got them, they found they were still empty. And it scared them. Boris Becker stunned the world when he won his second Wimbledon tournament and then confessed that he had struggled with depression and thoughts of suicide. Right? Jack Higgins wrote 60 novels, almost all of them bestsellers, right? And he said this, when you get to the top, there's nothing there. There's nothing. He said, I made a finite thing the ultimate, and when I got there, my soul's empty. You make your own desires, it can't handle the freight of the human heart. And yet Paul looks at his life, and he's contemplating life or death, and he looks and he says, for me to continue to live, in verse 22, if I live in the flesh, it means fruitful labor for me. He says, if I stay alive, all my life is fruitful labor. It's working that bears fruit. Why? Because to live is Christ. And as I pursue Christ, I am constantly able to bear fruit, namely helping other people progress in their faith and in their joy in Jesus. He says, as I pursue Jesus, the more I rest my heart on him, the more stable I find him to be. The more I lean into Jesus with all of my eager expectation and hope, the more strong I find him to be. Paul sounds deeply passionate here. He's exhausting the language to show you my eager expectation, my whole life is about Jesus. And what he found is that satisfactory. It's better than life. Christ is better than life. It can handle your desires. It provides an anchor for my morality. It provides an anchor for my morality. And I don't have time to unpack all of this, but it's interesting. Bertrand Russell said this as he contemplated the reality of not believing there's any God, and so not believing there's any divine purpose. Bertrand Russell wrote this: man is the product of causes which have no prevision of the end they were achieving. That is his origin. His growth, his hopes and fears, his love and beliefs are all the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms. No fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave. All the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of the human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system. It's really upbeat stuff. And the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. All of these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's habitation be safely built. What he was saying was this: if there is no ultimate reality, no God, he said, then no matter how much fire or passion you have, nothing you do has any meaning. Nothing has any value. If all we're here to do is create our own meaning because there isn't some created intent, he says, then whatever you're pursuing is ultimately meaningless because it'll just get buried in the ruins of the universe. So love somebody, kill somebody. It doesn't matter. None of it matters. Love is a joke. Friendship's a lie. Community is a game. It's a collocation of atoms with no purpose. And he says that's the reality. If there's no maker who had a created intent, then it's all meaningless and it leads to an unyielding despair, right? And so the reality is you'll see people who don't believe in a God that live very moral lives, and they can live moral lives. But atheism gives you no basis for morality. It gives you no grounding as to why you should care about somebody's human rights and not crush them, right? I'm not saying atheists can't be loving. I'm saying their philosophy gives them no basis for doing that, no anchor in reality. And yet here Paul speaks of his life and says there is a creator. There is a God. And the Son of God, Jesus Christ, was asked, what's the greatest commandment? What does God want? And he said, love God and love people. That I have anchored in eternity, that what my God wants is me to care about people. And so that's why Paul says, if I continue to live in the flesh, it is to help you progress in your joy and in your faith in Jesus. Paul looks and says, I have an eternal reason to pursue love for people. It's my calling under God. The created intent God gave me is to love him and to love others. When I have a created purpose to embrace, it gives me an anchor for my morality. And finally, in the face of death, if you're creating your own meaning because you don't know that any exists, death crushes it all. Death is the end, no matter what you do. Paul looks at death and says, death for me is gain. It's gain. He says, because my whole life is about God and the Son of God named Jesus. And Jesus faced death and it crushed him. And 3 days later, he rose and he beat it. He beat death, the ultimate destroyer of life. And he stands on the other side beckoning me forward. And he said, so my whole life is chasing Jesus, to know him and make him known. And death is a finish line, and it's a beginning of a whole new race of getting to run with Jesus forever. Death is my finish line, right? And it's my beginning. And so here's what's beautiful about this, and this is where we'll close. When you look at Paul, there's something fascinating happening here. If you look at his circumstances, they're a mess. He's in prison, no freedom. He's being slandered by people outside, and he's facing the possibility of his impending death. Some of us are having a bad day because we have a test next week. But if I came to you and said, hey, what if I took away your freedom? And what if your friends slandered you? And what if I put the threat of death on your life at any moment? You would say that's the worst possible circumstances. That's what Paul was facing. And yet read the passage. He's like, I want you guys to know things are going great here at camp. Whole prison guard knows about Jesus. I want you to know, I think I'm going to get out, but if I don't, fantastic, because I get to see Jesus. He's upbeat. The word rejoice comes around the whole time. Why? Because when Paul understands I have a God-given purpose, he's got the world in checkmate. He's got the world in checkmate. I don't know if you know this, but last night was a big night in America because the two greatest chess players on the planet met face to face in New York. One chess enthusiast, Tyrone Davis, said it was a life-fulfilling event, which makes me a little concerned for Tyrone. But before the invite-only crowd in Midtown New York, Magnus Carlsen, the 23-year-old current world champion, met Garry Kasparov, the 51-year-old former world champion. The moderator of the event said it's not often that you get to see the Michael Jordan and LeBron James of chess in the same room. Which made me wonder, does anyone ever use them that way? Like, oh, this is like the Carlsen-Kasparov of dating or whatever. I don't know. It's interesting. The 23-year-old one, just by the way, if you're curious. But if you don't care about chess, I'm not going to go that much deeper into what happened to them, but I'll just say, if you don't know anything about chess, I'm not going to explain it all to you now, but let me just say this. What's the point of chess? At the very basic level, what's the point of chess? You get positioned in a way that no matter what the other guy does, he can't beat you. You position yourself in a way that it doesn't matter how he moves the pieces on the board, you win. Look at the life of Paul as he connects with the eternal, as he knows God. They say, Paul, we're going to ruin your circumstances, take away your freedom, put you in jail. He says, great, a new mission opportunity. Right? They say, Paul, we're going to make your friends slander you. They're going to come after you. Are they preaching Christ? Yeah, fantastic. Right? Paul, we're going to kill you. Great, because to die is gain because I get to see Christ. Okay, we're going to keep you alive. Great, because that means progress and joy in the faith that I get to serve my fellow man until the day God calls me home. And they look and they're like, you can't beat this guy. No circumstance, no death, no life, no persecution, no affliction can shake his joy. He's got the world in checkmate. Why? Because he's tethered to the eternal. That's why. That's the hope we have when you get to know God. So the final application, and thanks for letting me run a little over tonight, is this. If you're not a believer in Jesus, if you haven't come to believe that God sent his son to the earth and his name is Jesus and he came to forgive us and heal us, to die to take away our sin and rise to give us hope, if you don't believe that, or I just want to challenge you, encourage you, don't miss out on this. Don't get a degree here to pursue a living and miss out on why you're alive. So many people can tell me what you do, but not many even bother to ask the question of why. Why? There's a God that made you. Don't waste your life on a purpose that's not worth your life. Your life is precious. Get to know Jesus Christ. Pursue him with us. Because when Paul held Jesus up next to everything else in the world, he says nothing compares to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ Jesus, for whose sake I have lost all things. He could joyfully release a suicidal attraction to the finite because he was tethered to the infinite. And I want that for you. I want it for you. And if you are a Christian, let me encourage you. Do you live like this? It's possible to say I'm a Christian and yet not live out of this deep understanding of the gospel. If I really am his, your position in that classroom is not an accident. It's by design. Your position in that dorm room and in that organization is not an accident. Are we quick to complain before we pursue the cause? Paul landed in prison and said, I'm here for the glory of Jesus. Have you ever said that about your job? I want to challenge you, Christian, every room you walk into tomorrow to say, I don't know all the reasons I'm here, but I know the ultimate one. That is to advance the name of Jesus. Paul said, my circumstances are for the advance of the gospel. My continued existence is for the advance of the faith deeper in your heart. That's what he said to the Philippians. He said, I live to see the gospel go further out to the non-believing, and I live to see the gospel go deeper into the hearts of the believing. That's why I'm here. When I walk into every room, that's my prayer. God, I'm here to introduce people to Christ and to call them to know him deeper and trust him more and enjoy him. That's your calling. Do you believe that? Some of you, of Christians, you go, I don't know if I do feel that way. I remember for me in college, I taught a Bible study on Philippians. And I remember I got to that point where I read the verse, to live is Christ and to die is gain. And I asked this group of college men, are you on board with that? Do you believe that? That Christ is so great that even dying, single, unmarried, even losing everything for him is gain? And they all went, yeah, I'm sure, yeah. And I was like, what? Like, you're all lying. I said, I'm the guy leading this Bible study, and I don't believe that. I said, if I die without getting married, that's going to be lame. If I die without getting a degree, that just feels like a waste of money. I have all these reservations about this text. I said, I don't want that to be true, but I feel that. Is he really worth my whole life? It's okay to admit that. But as I admitted that, I said, but God, this text is true. Will you show me if Jesus really is better than life? Will you help me believe that? Because I don't want to just throttle back into be a good person. Life's too short for that. And so I began a journey in college of pressing in. Is Jesus really worth my whole life? And what I discovered in college is what Paul found in Philippians. Everything is rubbish compared to the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. And so I want to challenge you with the text from last week. If you're a Christian and going, I don't know if I treasure Jesus that much, pray and ask God to give your love abounding abundance of knowledge about him. Say, God, help my love grow in knowledge of Jesus, because to see him and to know him is to love him, and to love him is to joyfully chase him. That's what Paul experienced. That's what we have on staff at Breakaway, and that's what we want for you. Pursue him. Get into the Word of God to know him. Let him take your flickering flame of affections for him and burst it into a bonfire, that you would say, he is worth all of my life. And as I pursue him, no circumstance can shake me. The success of others is worth my celebration. I have a reason to love even my enemies, and my finish line is forever and forever. I have a purpose that will never dim or fade because it's tethered to the eternal. That's my prayer for you.
My name is Elizabeth, and I'm here with Ben in Reed Arena. So if you've been tracking with us or keep up with our schedule or our venues, you might know that we are not planning on being in Reed Arena tonight. We initially were hoping to be out on Simpson-Joel Field in the middle of the Texas A&M campus, but due to some weather and some things out of our control, we are in Reed. But Reed is a great venue, and we're thrilled to be here, and we're just celebrating after a great night.
Absolutely, and it's awesome. I mean, we had to call it yesterday because of all the rain over the weekend. I don't know if you watched the Aggie game, but we had some damp grass here at Texas A&M. And so Simpson, I mean, we were sinking into it even before driving an 18-wheeler on it. It's not going to happen to set up a stage out there. But thank God we moved to Reed because it was raining tonight. I mean, it would have been a bad gig. But just big thank you to Reed Arena for hosting us. They've got an event. They had one this afternoon, and they've got one starting at 5 a.m. tomorrow, but they're in there working with us right now. Just awesome. So grateful for a good working relationship with their staff.
Yeah.
And it was a sweet night to be here.
Absolutely.
Oh, and just by the way, welcome to Elizabeth, everybody. Brent is out there running the teardown and the resetting up of Reed Arena. Elizabeth is on our staff and an amazing addition to the team and is now guiding this podcast moment. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so tonight we got to dig even further into Philippians and focused on the last half of chapter 1 and really just got to unpack that pivotal phrase to live as Christ and to die as gain. And that's a lot. And so Ben, there's some things you wanted to explain further from the talk that maybe there just wasn't time for?
Oh, man, there's like a ton of things. There's like more than one talk in these notes that I didn't get to. And I don't know if I'm going to unpack all of it in this moment. But, there's a way to teach this passage to really focus on the Christian life. I mean, this is Paul as a believer running into some really adverse circumstances. If you think about, if I asked you to think, what are some of the worst things that could happen to you? You'd be like, well, loss of my freedom, being slandered by people maliciously and falsely, and being threatened with death. And if you look at Paul's situation and just go, what's happening in this passage? All three of those things are happening right now. And yet you hear him and he has a sense of purpose. He has a trust in God's guidance of his life. He has great joy in it. And he looks and says, all my circumstances are to advance the gospel. My continued existence is to help people progress in their faith and trust in Jesus. And that clarity of purpose gave him a buoyancy to his soul, no matter what happens in circumstances. And I think that's what I really wanted to bring across tonight. There's a lot happening in this text we didn't get to, and we'll probably circle back to in different talks, quite honestly. But I just wanted to point people at that. And like I said, there was a way to do it that was just applicational to Christians, but I wanted to really present it to everybody and say, this is a very unique way of doing life, what's happening here. I mean, this kind of person that can be really calm when circumstances go crazy, and yet isn't calm because they're sort of disaffected and don't care about anything, but they're calm in circumstances but are still a passionate person. That's a rare human being. That's a life-changingly rare human being. There's the great story of Henry Stanley. Back in the day, like he was in the 1800s, was an atheist reporter for the New York Times. And they sent him to find David Livingstone. This is back, like I said, 1800s. David Livingstone went to be a missionary in Africa, and Africa was, they called it the white man's graveyard, because if a white person went, they never came back. And so David Livingstone became this huge celebrity because he dared to go. And it was it would be like if we were watching someone go to the moon. We'd all be tuned in, or to Mars. We'd be tuned into what are they experiencing, what's happening there. For him to go to Africa, he just captured the imagination of all of Britain. And then he went dark, disappeared for 5 years. And They sent Stanley to go find him. And he shows up an atheist, staunch atheist, doesn't believe in any of this stuff that Livingstone's into. But just watching him live his life, he said the guy was courageous, but very patient. He said he was deeply compassionate and meek and gentle, and yet also very manly. And he said it was the mixture of Livingstone's meekness and manliness. He said, it converted me. He said, he converted me, and he didn't even try to do it. I just saw somebody that had peace no matter what the circumstance, and yet was living a passionate life, and I thought that's the craziest thing I've ever seen. And that really is the potential for the Christian. If you really gather this, God who's directing everything directs my life, and my purpose is his purpose. To live is about him. That liberates you from having to worry about so many things, and it makes you such a rare, beautiful creature in the world.
And without that, just coming up with your own purposes, I read it today. The number one top selling drugs in the world, and particularly in the U.S., are number one is an antidepressant, and number two is an antacid. Even in the most prosperous nation in the world, what are we doing? We're trying to figure out how to fight off our sadness and the twisting up of our stomachs because we're not happy with life. I read a report, Gallup poll, just did a poll, and 2/3 of people in the world are unhappy at their work. And over half the people in America would say, I'm very unhappy with what I do. So this is real world stuff we're talking about.
Yeah.
Most of the world is looking and saying, I'm unhappy with my life, and I don't see the meaning or purpose or value in what I do. And then you have this very rare breed like Paul that says, no matter what happens, my life's full of meaning and purpose and joy. And that's what I wanted people to get on board with. So I don't know if I got it all in there, but I want them to get it, Elizabeth. And so that's what we were talking about. And I hope this spurs people on to press into Christ, because as we talk about him in Philippians, I hope we'll see the beauty of Jesus and why he's worth giving your life to. So anyway, that's the thought.
So yeah, such a powerful text and just a lot to take and process and hopefully just implement into the practicals and every day of our life to live in that peace and to live truly believing and asking God to believe even more deeply that to live is Christ and to die is gain. So we're thankful for a great night. We'll be back in Read next week and looking forward to it. Thanks.